Good morning. Good morning. So in 2016, 6 years ago, I was contacted by a woman named Janet Newton, who was then an intern at this church. She had read my book and she came to see me. At that time, I was just coming here in the summers and asked if I would give a sermon to this congregation. We talked, we fell in love, we are bonded for life, and we came up with the title that I'd used before, which is, Are You a Religious Naturalist Without Knowing It? So I gave my sermon, and at the end, I was greeted by a woman sitting right there, who had the most beautiful smile I had ever seen. And she gave a joyous proclamation. I finally know who I am. I'm a religious naturalist. Her name, Esther Hopkins. 6 years later, Esther is no longer with us physically, but her smile and her essence pervade this sanctuary. In my new book, I have had the honor to dedicate it to her. The reading that you just heard from Barb began as follows. Humans need stories, grand, compelling stories. Where does this need come from? This proclivity is based on the fact that we humans are narrative beings. We are unique among all worldly creatures in our facility with symbolic language, where symbols point to underlying meanings and understandings. And we use this facility to construct language-based narratives. We think in stories. We dream in stories. We remember using stories. And we each construct what we can call a narrative self, an I self, with an autobiography, who awakes in the morning and falls asleep at night and experiences and learns and loves and weeps. Our human cultures are also based on narratives, and many of these take the form of religious narratives. In a religious narrative, a grand, compelling story is first told as to how things are and how they came to be. Responses to this story are then elicited along three pathways. The first is the interpretive path. We ask, what does this story mean? The second is interior or spiritual. We ask, how does this story make me feel? And the third is outward. We ask, how does this story guide my moral sensibilities? In traditional and indigenous religions, answers to these questions are provided in the teachings of sages and clergy, and they are reinforced by wondrous art and ceremony. Our science-based understandings of how the natural world works and how it came to be have historically been offered in packets. Physics here, biology there, ecology there. But recently, these understandings have come together to yield a grand and compelling story, the epic of evolution, a story that many of us are calling everybody's story, because it is true for us all. Here's a version of everybody's story from philosopher Loyal Rue, where his focus is on matter. During the course of epic events, matter was distilled out of radiant energy, segregated into galaxies, collapsed into stars, fused into atoms, swirled into planets, spliced into molecules, captured into cells, mutated into species, compromised into thought, and cajoled into cultures. Systems upon systems of organization have emerged from matter over 13 billion years of creative natural histories. A key chapter in this story is the formation of our planetary matrix 4.5 billion years ago, followed by the emergence of the first living beings from within this matrix some 3.5 billion years ago, followed by the evolution of these beings to generate the mind-blowing diversity within which we humans are embedded, including the splendid biodiversity of our own species. All of us creatures are interrelated. We share common ancestry. We are all kin. We are also fully interdependent, both in local ecosystems and in creating the planetary ecosystem writ large. Darwinism tells us that natural selection favors organisms who are fit. We now understand that being fit entails fitting in to the habitats where we find ourselves. Another key chapter is the very recent emergence of the language-based human species and our creation of countless cultures that center on religious narratives. As Rebecca Gilbert explored beautifully in her October sermon, we now understand that this emergence occurred in Africa. All of our signature traits, our language-centric selves, and our capacity to form cultures evolved in Africans. The humans who recently migrated out of Africa were fully Pan-African. Our very recent ancestors had Black skin. Racism is bullshit. So we can now consider two definitions. A naturalist is a person who adopts everybody's story as a core descriptor of her or his reality. A naturalist takes nature fully to mind. A religious naturalist also takes nature fully to mind. In addition, religious naturalists take nature to heart. We seek interpretive, spiritual, and moral orientation within everybody's story. We explore its religious potential. Happily, these explorations prove to be deeply rewarding. On the interpretive axis, we gasp in wonder at the mystery that there is anything at all rather than nothing. And we find helpful ways to think about the origins of suffering and death. On the spiritual axis, we find in the natural world abundant resources for awe, for reverence, for assent, for humility, for gratitude, and for joy. On the moral axis, we recognize our capacities for compassion and nurture are emergent from our intensely social great ape lineage. We consider the planetary matrix within which we dwell to be sacred. And this leads us to develop robust eco-moral sensibilities and practices. So, where does Unitarianism, universalism come out on the religious naturalist axis? UU is currently founded on 7 principles the first 6 of which relate to parameters of human relationship. The 7th principle reads as follows, quote, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Religious naturalists would say that the interdependent web of all existence elicits far more than respect, a word that suggests an observant distancing. We would say that the web elicits immersion, reverence, a joyous celebration of our critterhood, and a moral commitment to its preservation and restoration. A group of UU ministers and congregants is currently launching an initiative to nurture religious naturalist sensibilities within the matrix of the UU Church. I deeply hope that members of our small but mighty church will be active participants in this process. Let me close with another passage from Loyal Rue. The universe is a single reality, one long, sweeping, spectacular process of interconnected events. The universe is not a place where evolution happens, it is the evolution happening. It is not a stage on which drama unfolds, it is the unfolding drama itself. If ever there were a candidate for a universal story, it must be this story of cosmic evolution. The story shows us in the deepest possible sense that all beings are sisters and brothers, fashioned from the same stellar dust, energized by the same star, nourished by the same planet, endowed with the same genetic code, and threatened by the same evils. This story, more than any other, humbles us before the magnitude and complexity of creation. Like no other story, it bewilders us with the improbability of our existence, astonishes us with the interdependence of all things, and makes us feel grateful for the lives we have. And not the least, it inspires us to express our gratitude to the past by accepting a solemn and collective responsibility for the future. Our parish theme for this month is wonder. Here's how Lewis Thomas, author of the classic book, The Lives of a Cell, expresses his wonderment. You'd think that the mere fact of existing would keep us all in a contented dazzlement of surprise. You'd think we'd never stop dancing. May it be so. Amen.